You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Hey everybody, thank you very much for hitting that play button. This is another episode of the Dave Bullis Podcast, but then again, you should know that already because you hit the play button, right? Anyways, I want to say thank you to everyone who voted for us in the Monkeys Fighting Robots podcast competition. While we didn't win either category, we did get an honorable mention, which is huge because there was only one actual winner. So there wasn't like a second place and a third place. There was just one main winner, and they gave out a handful of honorable mentions. This is from them themselves. This isn't the audience award. And they gave this podcast an honorable mention. So I was pretty, ecstatic because even though I didn't win, still getting an honorable mention is huge. So thank you to the Monkeys Fighting Robots competition. Thank you to Matthew Sardo. And I want to say thank you to all of my listeners for your continual listenership, for tuning in. Thank you to everyone who keeps sharing the show. And I know you're probably sick of hearing me say this, but, every time you share the show, it helps us out immensely. So thank you so much to everyone for all of your continued support. And, speaking of which, we have a really cool guest on this show this week who was a very good supporter of this podcast. He and I have been going back and forth for a long while about actually getting him on this show, and we finally got him on the show, and I'm really excited. So let's just go on to this episode of the Dave Bullis Podcast. My next guest is a filmmaker, teacher, author of the book, The Cheerful Subversive's Guide to Independent Filmmaking, and he's co-founder of the Slamdance Film Festival. We're going to discuss a ton of stuff on this episode, including being mentored in film by a convicted axe murderer, starting Slamdance when he was rejected from Sundance, what happens when his own movies are rejected from his own competition, and we talk about a ton more. There's so many stories in here. Seriously, it's Sunday. Just just ignore everyone in your life and just listen to this show as much as possible. But no, seriously though, this is a phenomenal episode because Dan is so full of stories because he has been doing this for so many years. Well, this is episode 149 with guest Dan Mirvish.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Hey, Dan, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Sure, my pleasure being here, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
Dan, you're somebody who I've wanted to have on the podcast for a while. Because again, years ago I was reading up about Slamdance, which you're a co-founder of, and you sort of have that indie filmmaker spirit. You have that, you wanted to sort of do your own thing. And that is so key, and I want to get to talking about that as well. But before we do that, Dan, I wanted to ask, how did you find yourself getting into the film industry? I mean, did you always watch movies as a kid, or was it something later on that you sort of found yourself, an industry you sort of found yourself in?
Well, I'm like most people, I'm from Omaha, and back in Omaha there, we didn't have a real continuous art house, but there were always a few odd places where we could catch like art house type and independent, there weren't so many independent films then, but like obscure foreign films. So I would do that as much as I could as a kid, but it never really occurred to me that you could make a career out of it. And then it wasn't really until college, like the first semester in college, and I went to a school that didn't have a film program, but they had like one film class, and it was a Super 8 class. And I took that and really liked it. And then I took a political philosophy class where we were studying the obscure German philosophers of the Frankfurt School of the 1930s. And there was this quote from Theodor Adorno who once said, "The laughter of an audience reminds me of some of the worst forms of bourgeois sadism." And I thought, well, here's a guy who hasn't seen a good Marx Brothers movie. And that sort of, in a weird way, that kind of got me interested in kind of on the film theory side. And then simultaneously, there was, the school I went, which was Washington University in St. Louis. It did have a really good film programming series or a screening series, and I had gotten involved with that, where we would show, a foreign film, an independent film, kind of a midnight film, like 4 films a week on 16 millimeter, and I kind of got involved with programming those, and then I thought, well, let me get into film a little bit more, and so I realized I could take some summer classes at UCLA in cinematography, and so I came out to LA. And it was great because on the map, UCLA looks like it's only an inch away from the beach. And I thought that was awesome. But it turns out it takes an hour by bus, So, but I had a great time. I had a really inspiring kind of Czechoslovakian film professor there. Turns out Alexander Payne was in my classes at the same time. And we had this connection from Omaha. But I really enjoyed that and kind of learned how to, I learned what a real film school even looks like, and smells like. UCLA, by the way, smells amazing. If you ever come out there, it smells like eucalyptus and glitter. It's an amazing smell. And I learned how to use the 16 millimeter camera, and then went back to college. And as part of this film series I was involved with, since I was the only one now who knew how to use 16 millimeter camera, I kind of directed and produced these no smoking and coming soon shorts that we would show before the movies, and that was kind of my first foray into independent production. It was just like me and a bunch of friends just shooting these goofy little trailers before the films, and that was fun. But then I thought about going to film school for graduate school because by then I had majored in history and political science, and I was doing a lot of journalism. And but I kind of put it off for a couple of years and went out to D.C. And for a couple of years or a year and a half or so, I was a speechwriter to a senator, Tom Harkin from Iowa. And actually that, in a weird way, kind of dovetailed nicely with film in the sense that, number one, as a speechwriter, you have to write in a character's voice. In this case, it's a real person's voice, but it's a really good training for screenwriting, I thought. But also from a practical standpoint, we would shoot a lot of the speeches onto videotape and then send the videotapes out to the Kiwanis Club in Des Moines or something. But we would do a lot of that in the a recording studio in the basement of the Capitol, video studio down there. And it was great because I would hang out with the guys in the video studio and that kind of, it wasn't like creative filmmaking very much, but it was, but it still kind of kept my interest going and alive. And then I realized, if you stay in Washington for, on into your 20s, they just give you a law degree by osmosis and you just stay there. And I thought, well, yeah, I don't really want that. So I applied to film school and got it. And I got rejected from almost all of them. The only one I got into was USC. And so I went out to SC for film school. And and then while I was there, no one had ever done a full-length feature as their thesis problem, or as their thesis project, rather, mainly because USC has a policy where they own the negative of every film that gets shot there, which if you're doing a short is not a big deal, but if you want to do an indie feature, that doesn't really work out. So, but I found a loophole where I could do it, and so my third year I shot, I actually went back to Nebraska and shot something called Omaha the Movie, and that was my first feature. So there you go. That's how I got into it.
Glenn, Dan, I'm glad that you mentioned how it smelled in there, because I was actually going to ask you that same question. When you said how it felt and smelled, I was like, what does it smell like? Because I've actually been to the biggest film college I've ever been to. I didn't go to school for film. But I've TA'd there, and I've done a couple other things there. And it was probably Temple University, and that's probably the biggest film school in Philadelphia. And then I've also TA'd at Drexel, which is probably the second biggest.
At Drexel.
Yeah.
I did some guest lecturing at Drexel a few years ago.
Oh, nice. What did you think of Drexel?
I liked it. Yeah, I thought it was great. And they paid me, so that was even better. And I got a great T-shirt from there that I wear all the time, actually. So they make really good T-shirts. But yeah, my friend Lisa Raven, who was also one of the founding filmmakers of Slamdance, she was teaching there. She's not there anymore, but at the time she was. So it was fun. She had me in there for 2 days of lectures, and we screened my last film there. And yeah, it was good. The students seemed, pretty on top of things. So yeah, I liked it. But I know people that have gone through the Temple program or taught there, and yeah, that's supposed to be a great program too. So.
Yeah, and it's funny too because I was a TA there for Mark Bienstock, who actually is a producer for M. Night Shyamalan. And while he was a TA there, while I was a TA there for him, for Mark, they were making Split, which is actually I think still #1 at the box office right now.
Right.
So, it's just funny, because I hear so much about Temple, but Drexel, I mean, they've been able to get a lot of really cool people like yourself and Mark to come out there and just guest lecture and talk about, because this is something I found though that is true with a lot of film schools. You have to have people who've actually done it teaching you. Otherwise, it's just a lot of theory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, we used to joke about it in film school that all the professors were has-beens or wannabes. I have a feeling that's true in a lot of fields. It's not just film. I mean, at USC, I mean, we had, and a lot of them were great professors. I mean, not to demean them, which I just did, but I mean, we had one guy, Eddie Dimitrick, who was 87 years old, who had been one of the Hollywood 10. I mean, his history goes way back. I mean, he got his start in the silent film era, but by the time he was in his 90s, he was teaching AVID classes. But it was great. I mean, he did have this wealth of experience behind him. And we had some other guys like that. They weren't quite that old, but who had, he's like, well, when you're directing Monty Clift, here's what you do. And okay, but on the other hand, he had these interesting stories that back in the 30s, when he was kind of trying to make the move from editor to director, they would sneak onto the studio a lot and steal a bunch of equipment and go shoot a movie over the weekend and return it on Mondays. And it's like, that's really not that different from kind of the indie film, spirit now. You kind of realize not that much has changed, and we're only one or two generations away from the birth of film. I mean, that was the kind of the remarkable thing about getting to know some of those guys. But the interesting thing was there was really nobody. I mean, I was in film school in the early 90s, and that was kind of during the rise of American independent film, kind of as we know it today. And there was only one person on the faculty or staff at USC who had any experience making, those kind of contemporary indie films. And he was a guy who worked in the stockroom, this guy named Crazy Aziz. And we called him that before we found out he was an axe murderer. So it's a long story, but basically he finally convinced the dean to teach a class on independent film. Brian Singer took the class. He was there like just a year before me, and then he made Public Access his first film kind of through that class, and then I made my first film, Omaha the Movie, kind of under the auspices of this guy, the axe murderer. But then shortly after I had him, the dean fired him. He sold the script to two different companies. He was going through a bitter divorce struggle with his wife, and he hacked her to death with an axe and burned the house down and killed one of their kids. And then he was missing for 6 weeks, and everybody was freaked out because we were like, well, wait, was I on his good side or his bad side? There was extra security on campus at every studio, every agency in town. And finally, some hikers found his body in the woods 6 weeks later, and he had shot himself in the head. And but the funny part of the story, Dave, because there's always the funny part to every axe murdering story, is the script that he had sold to two companies at the same time, which is, by the way, never a good idea, was a little bit of a creepy script about a guy who sells himself to a snuff film to support his family or something like that. About 5 years later or so, it somehow the rights get sorted out and it gets made by a hot, young, aspiring actor in Hollywood, and who makes his film, gets his friends, including Marlon Brando, to star in it, and it premieres in Cannes. Like everyone's dream, and which answers the age-old question: how do you get a film into Cannes? Well, apparently you become an axe murderer and you kill yourself. But then the film, at Cannes, they either love the film or they hate a film, and so it was booed soundly. Like everybody hated it. And the actor who had made this movie, who directed it, was so distraught that he got up at the back of the theater and he vowed, "I am so distraught I vow that this film will never be seen again. And to this day, it never has. And it's a little bit mysterious what happened to that film after that. So I had an axe murderer teach me how to become an independent filmmaker. So
that might be the ultimate story that I've heard, Dan. About I've never heard anybody have an axe murderer teach them how to make a film.
Oh yeah, well clearly you've never had Bryan Singer on your show either.
Well, Bryan Singer's next week. You're this week.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. So anyway, but you may be asking yourself, well, then who's the young aspiring actor who made that vow? Are you asking? Anyway, it turns out it was Johnny Depp, and the film was called The Dead, and that was Johnny Depp's first time, and maybe his last time directing too. So,
well, I mean, it's a weird story, but and then people always say, well, you know, Dan, has anyone ever made a movie about Crazy Aziz, the axe murderer? And interestingly enough, there was another young, hot, aspiring actor at around the same time who he and his then fiancée decided to make a short film, or heard about this story, and they made a short film about it, and they were almost done with the short film, and then the actor and the fiancée split up because I think she was a little bit nuts or something like that anyway, and he was an actor. And so as they split up, that actor vowed, and this short film will never be seen again. And to this day, it never has been. And you know who that actor was? Who was that?
Ben Affleck. And that was his first film. So there you go. So he's done okay as a director, you know. And Johnny Depp, his career is, you know, it's done all right. But so my history in independent film has this odd checkered past to it. But anyway, be that as it may, that didn't really get in the way of that didn't really affect my career one way or the other. So I have never vowed that any of my films will never be seen again. Quite the contrary. I usually vow that they'll be seen by any means necessary. So.
And I think that's a spirit to have too, Dan, is be seen by any means necessary. You know,
exactly. The Malcolm X theory of distribution. So.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Jerry Lewis. You remember that concentration camp movie he made?
Yes. The Clown.
The Clown. Yeah. And it was shown, I think, one time to a group of people, and Jerry Lewis said, he goes, "We can never show this to anybody."
Yeah, and it never has been. It's crazy. Yeah, no, he is funny about that movie. Like, that is the great white whale of film archivists, is trying to nab that film. But yeah, no, as long as he's alive, that film is never going to be seen by anyone.
Yeah, and it's kind of odd too, because there was an episode of Mark Maron's WTF podcast that Jerry Lewis came on. Jerry Lewis was on there, and the episode was like 20, 30 minutes. Well, Mark comes in to interview him, and then abruptly, you know, during the whole conversation, Jerry goes, "That's it. That's all I can give you." And Mark goes, "Wait, the interview's over?" And Jerry goes, "Yeah, I've been doing interviews all day." And Mark goes, "But, you know, we've been planning this for months." And Jerry goes, "I'm sorry, that's it." And his assistant comes, so Jerry leaves, and then his assistant comes in and goes, "Do you want me to get him back, Mark?" And Mark's like, "No, don't even worry about it." But it's just, you know, it's just, I've heard that about Jerry. I think now.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if it's an act that he still is keeping up with, or if this is just like he finally is just like, "I'm tired and I'm just gonna tell everyone like it is." I can't tell anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, there. Hollywood Reporter just like a month or two ago did a really cool series on like 10, you know, filmmakers and actors or whatever that are still working, that are over the age of 90, and you know, it's like Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks, or I don't know, Cloris Leachman or something like, you know, Betty White, and they do this, and they did video interviews with all of them, and Jerry Lewis was one of them, and it is 7 minutes of the most awkward interview ever. And because he basically kicks the guy out of his house. It's hysterical. And yeah, and you don't quite know, is it an act or is it just him being a curmudgeon? And I have a feeling it's a little bit somewhere in between. So, but if you want, but speaking of USC, there's somewhere on YouTube, and I think if you just search for it, there is a really interesting clip of Jerry Lewis teaching a USC film class This is in like the late 60s or something like that. And so I don't know how they got this clip. And it's a very serious class on lenses and what, because he was a director too, I mean, he directed a number of movies. And so, I think USC would get in, different directors to do guest lectures. And this is very serious, pedantic, or pedagogical clip on, this is a wide lens, this is a long lens. It's just like Film School 101 taught by Jerry Lewis. And it's kind of funny because it's not really funny. He's just, just being very serious about talking about the craft of directing. And, it's a fascinating clip. And, people kind of forget that about Jerry Lewis, is that, for much of his career, he was a director like anyone else.
Yeah, it's very true, Dan. And, I think where he finally left off, but I just remember just reading different things about I'm sorry, not to get too off topic, but I just want to tell you this one quick anecdote. There was an anecdote about, do you remember Bing Crosby? Do you remember that Bing Crosby?
Yeah.
And apparently, they were him and Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin were all supposed to do this, for like a telethon together. They were supposed to come out and, they were going to, joke around with each other. Well, Bing Crosby refused to do it. And he said, I don't like Jerry Lewis. And he goes, I'm afraid that Jerry Lewis is going to have one of his he called it a freak out session, and he's going to try to rip my toupee off. And Jerry's like, I'm not going to try to rip his toupee off. He's like, I just want to get this done. And he goes, well, we'll go out there, we'll do a little slapstick, and that's it. And he refused to go out there and do anything with Jerry Lewis. And that was I always thought that was funny because I've always heard that Bing Crosby was kind of crazy himself. And
always good.
Yeah, they're right. Not like crazy. What was it? Crazy Azid or Azad?
Crazy Aziz, yeah.
Yeah, not called Crazy Aziz, but they're crazy in their own right. But but Dan, just to sort of go back, you went to college with Alexander Payne. Did you actually end up seeing Nebraska?
I'll admit to you and no one else. Thankfully, not that many people listen to your podcast, but I've never actually seen it, and I have it on my Netflix queue, and I'm friends with the DP, and actually the prop master is one of my neighbors in LA, which is very odd coincidence. But no, I haven't actually seen it, but I hear it's wonderful. So, yeah.
No, I just wanted to ask because you both grew up in. Because you went to school with them, and I just thought maybe if you ever saw that. But,
no. I mean, I've seen most of his other films, and I was actually on the set when he was for a day of Citizen Ruth. I went and visited him on the set of that. I mean, our careers have kind of intertwined in odd little ways. I mean, he's a few years older than me. He was in my sister's 7th grade algebra class in junior high, But then, and then we he was just starting grad school at UCLA when I was doing that summer class. So I honestly don't really remember him that well from that. But then a few years later, after we made Omaha the movie was his first film I did. And I went back to Nebraska and shot that. And I became very close friends with the Omaha film commissioners. And our film was really the first indie kind of festival level indie film that had shot in Nebraska and made by locals. And so I think I was finishing that film up. I was in post-production or getting on the festival circuit with it. And they said, oh, Dan, can you meet with this other guy named Alex? Because back then he was Alex, not Alexander. But anyway, can you meet with this guy, Alex, who's also from Omaha out in LA? And we met up at this coffee shop called Ships that had toasters on every table. But anyway, and then we kind of realized, oh yeah, we were both in that same class at UCLA together. And that was kind of when we made the connection. But he was getting ready to make his first film, Citizen Ruth. And his producers wanted him to shoot it in Austin because at the time Austin was kind of the hot indie film place. Richard Linklater and Robert Rodriguez were there. And Alex was trying to convince his own producers that there was enough of a basic film infrastructure in Omaha that they could shoot it there, enough kind of crew and background actors and things like that. And so kind of his conversation with me was about me helping him convince his producers he could shoot there. which he did convince them of that. And then he went back and he shot, 4 other movies there. So it's, we've had a lot, we know a lot of the same people, obviously. So, because there's only 10 people who live in Omaha. So, so we all know each other,
Exactly. And every one of those 10 people in Omaha, by the way, Dan, they all listen to this podcast. So that's what...
Exactly. I hope so.
So, as we were talking about Omaha, the movie, so I wanted to actually ask you that. So I'm glad you brought it up, because I wanted to, as we talk about your filmography, so where was it where, in your career, where you finally said, I want to, make, you're obviously, if you went to USC and then you just moved back to Nebraska now to shoot Omaha, the movie. Mm-hmm. So where was that sort of impetus to sort of, you said to yourself, this is the movie that I'm going to make?
Well, what happened was the summer after my first year at USC. Now, most of my friends and colleagues we were all getting internships at production companies to just do coverage, write synopses and summaries of screenplays. And that's kind of an entry-level kind of position in Hollywood. You just work for some production company, usually for free as an intern, and just read, sit in an air-conditioned office all summer and read scripts. And I had one of these lined up, and I was, but I wasn't really looking forward to it. And then I saw on the bulletin board at USC, like the job board there was an ad there was a piece of paper with an ad, and it said, interns needed for terrorist filmmaking, 1 week of feature filmmaking in LA. And I thought, terrorist filmmaking, I wonder what that is. I've heard of guerrilla filmmaking, but what is terrorist filmmaking? So I call the number, and this guy with a thick Hungarian accent answers. I said, yeah, what? He says, hello. And I say, yeah, what is this terrorist filmmaking? He said, oh, yeah, sorry, my dictionary was wrong. I meant to write guerrilla filmmaking. And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. But yeah, so it turned out it was a kickboxing movie that was directed by a Hungarian. It was produced by a guy from Hong Kong. The screenwriter was actually my screenwriting professor at UST. That was a C connection. And they were shooting 1 week of exteriors in LA, and then all the interiors and kind of nature exteriors were going to be in the Philippines for 5 weeks. And so they needed people to help with the LA shoot. So I did that for that first week of shooting, which was great because it was a real set and, shooting 35 millimeter film. And I was, an assistant production manager for the first few days and a location scout and a camera assistant. And by the third day, the Hong Kong producer, like, for example, I had to pick up the Hong Kong producer at the airport. He shows up at the director's apartment and he opens his briefcase filled with $300,000 in cash. And I was like, oh my God, what's that? He goes, it's the budget. What do you think it was? And, so, it was a real kind of rough and ready shoot, but the producer said, Dan, you seem to be the only one who knows what's going on around here. Do you want to come out to the Philippines with us and be the second assistant director on set, and we'll pay you $400 a week? And so I asked the only question one should ask in that situation, which is there a return ticket? And there was. So I said, sure. So I went out to the Philippines for that summer, and I never showed up at my script reading job. I think they're still waiting for me. And it was there's an old adage in filmmaking that you learn more from working on a bad movie than you do from working on a good movie. And I learned a lot on this movie. It was like everything bad that could happen did happen on this film, and I wound up doing a lot on it. In addition to second assistant directing, I was. The screenwriter couldn't come with, so he told the director, oh, Dan knows how to write dialogue, so I wound up writing a couple extra scenes and punching up dialogue, and I had to act in it because I needed people to act in, like little parts. I got shot in the chest twice in that movie, 2 different scenes, So, and then I came back to LA and they made me the post supervisor, and I was like, that's great. What's a post supervisor? And, I learned, and, that it basically means you have to find an edit suite. So I found like this porn company that had an extra edit room that they let us use, they rented to us, but it was they were very nice people. It was called Miracle Films, and their motto was, if it's a good film, it's a miracle. And, so she had these crazy adventures. But the bottom line was, between the beginning of the summer and the end of the summer, I had worked on a movie from literally script to completion, and I learned how to do it from these, this Hungarian director who I later, became friends with, and he became a bit of a mentor to me, and this crazy Hong Kong producer, and all these nutty people. And I realized, well, if all these people who can barely speak the same language to each other can make a movie, regardless of whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, how hard could it be? And so I thought, and this was at a time when, as I said, like the guys in Austin, Linkletter and Rodriguez, were making films. I thought, well, if these guys in Austin can make films, based on the support of their local community, why don't I go back to Nebraska? And a buddy of mine who's a musician had told me about this great place called Carhenge, which is in western Nebraska, that has it's an exact replica of Stonehenge, but built out of old American cars stuck in the ground. And I thought, well, all right, well, let's end the movie there, and we'll start the movie in Omaha. We'll just kind of come up with a goofy road trip comedy. And I was still friends with a lot of actors in Nebraska. In Nebraska, Omaha has always been a strong theater town ever since Henry Fonda came, and Marlon Brando came from there. So there were a lot of great actors there, but I went back to the film commission. I said, but I need a local producer. And they said, well, there's this one guy here named Dana who's done a bunch of commercials, but he might be interested in getting into features. And by the way, his grandfather is Robert Altman. And I said, well, he's hired, So Dana Altman became my producing partner, and then Robert Altman became sort of our mentor on the project, which was amazing learning from him. We raised the money from all local investors. Our single biggest living investor right now is actually Chuck Hagel, the former Secretary of Defense. But at the time, he was just Chuck, a local venture capital guy who gave us a little bit of money. But it was that kind of thing. So, it was a fun little movie. Shot on 35 millimeter. We actually edited on the Paramount lot, but we used Panavision. Panavision gave us free cameras, and then it didn't get into Sundance, and then we started Slamdance. So that kind of led to that.
Well, Dan, I just want to ask one question before I ask you about Sundance, and that question is, about making, because you have that local flair, hey, listen, I'm Dan, and I'm from Nebraska, and we're going to make this in their hometown. That's something that's a point that I always hammer home to different filmmakers, is because they think if they don't live in New York or L.A., they're sunk. They can never make a film unless they live in L.A. or New York. Yeah. But I often, my counterpoint to that is, if you live in a smaller town or a city, or even some place in the Midwest, or down south or wherever, you have an advantage, and that is that it's sort of like Cheers, where everyone knows your name in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So you can go up to and ask, hey, listen, Fred owns a body shop. I can ask Fred if I could use his office, or I can ask this or that, and it's more conducive, because now, Dan, if you go out to L.A. or New York and say, hey, could I shoot at your coffee shop? They're going to say it's $10,000 a day with a full insurance bond of $1 million, and you're like, well, okay, there's our whole budget right there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it was great shooting in Omaha. At one point, the film commission wanted me to meet with the mayor, and I actually had a little scene of quote unquote the mayor in the movie, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Mayor, you should play the mayor in the movie." He said, "Well, yeah, I'd love to," and he showed up in on his motorcycle with his full leather regalia on, and it was just kind of weird but fun. And then we got a call from the governor's press secretary, because the mayor was a Republican, the governor was a Democrat. It's Ben Nelson, who was the governor at the time, and the press secretary said, "Oh, we heard the mayor's going to be in the movie. Is there a part for the governor?" And I said, "Well, there is now." And so we wrote a part for the governor, and then he did a cameo in the film too. And so once you get the mayor and the governor in your movie, I mean, all doors open. It's like, we need a crane. Boom, there's a crane. The local power company shows up the crane. We need a highway blocked off. Boom, there's a highway blocked off. And it was great. That would not happen in LA or New York. And just as you say, you want to shoot local with your first film, and and keep going back to the well if it works. I've gone back and shot part of my last movie, Between Us. We shot in Nebraska, and same kind of thing. It's like, oh, we need a road blocked off, and Dana just called his buddy the sheriff. It's like, done. It's like, that was easy. He's like, permit? We don't need Mexican permits. So, there's a reason Alexander Payne keeps going back to Nebraska. It's easy to shoot there, and people love him there, So,
yeah.
And just creatively, it's and something actually Richard Linklater told me when I talked to him once years ago was when he was shooting Dazed and Confused, I think, which was in Austin, which was sort of a studio film at the time, but he loved shooting in Austin, and he said the reason why, especially at the time, it was before Austin became quite as hip as it is now. He said the studio people didn't want to come out there, so they just let him make whatever movie he wanted to make, and he just loved the creative freedom from it. So, so this is true whether you're making a little indie film or a studio film or whatever. But yeah, get out of Dodge if you can. But that said, I live in LA now, and I think if you're making your second film, the interesting question I hear from filmmakers is, well, look, any idiot can make a first film because you don't know any better. So you're asking for favors from all your friends, all your family, and then you wind up pissing them all off when you can't pay them back or whatever. And so then you get stuck. You're like, well, how do I make my second film? I can't go back to town. My parents have disowned me. My friends have defriended me, and I always tell people, well, that's why you need to get on the festival circuit, because clearly you need new friends, and that's a great way to make new friends. But also, if you're in LA or New York or any other kind of big film center, I guess there aren't that many others, but what's nice is there is so many young people who want to work on films, that are from Nebraska, from Iowa, that come out to LA, come out to New York. And so you can find new friends to exploit their good graces and make a second film or a third film. So in a weird way, yes, you should make your first film in your hometown. But if you think you've burned all those bridges, don't give up. Like, just make your second film in LA or New York, and then by the time you hit your third film, then you can go back to your hometown, and it's a little easier. But I know a lot of people that kind of get stuck after that first film because they're like, oh no, now what do I do? So,
well, you mentioned going on the festival circuit, and I wanted to ask you, you couldn't get, your film Omaha didn't get into Sundance, so
right.
Starting Slamdance. So,
yeah,
I can only imagine, Dan, that maybe I'm wrong, but I can only imagine it must have taken a lot of effort to actually start a film festival, particularly at that time. Now, because even now, I know, even with the advent of the internet and all the digital medium that we have, it's a quote unquote little bit easier. But back in 95, 96, I can only imagine it must have taken a bigger effort to start a film festival.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're right, because the internet was just starting then, so that like AOL was just kind of kicking off then. So even just getting the word out that you're starting something like this was challenging. But yeah, but going back to kind of why we did it, 95 was kind of, the mid 90s were kind of a pivotal time in the history of independent film. That was kind of the year of the Hollywoodification of indie film. It was around that year that Miramax became part of Disney. Fine Line became part of Warner Brothers. Fox was launching Fox Searchlight. It was kind of the co-option of the independent film world from Hollywood. And so kind of within that milieu, what happened was that Sundance was part of that scene, and embraced it, and why wouldn't they? So they started to take more films by second-time directors instead of first-time directors, and more films with bigger budgets, and films that had these distribution deals already in place, and films that had bigger stars in them. And what happened was they kind of left behind this niche of the first-time director, people like me and a lot of my friends that were, that we had been influenced by kind of that first wave of American indies, or the first generation of Sundance, the Soderberghs and the Linkleters and the Rodriguez's. And so there were a lot more films by first-time directors, and fewer places to show them. So it was kind of in that environment, and still the downside though was the opportunities hadn't really caught up to the new reality on the ground, in the sense that, for example, I showed my film, Omaha the Movie, had a big distributor say, I love the film, we want to pick it up if it gets into Sundance. And if it doesn't get into Sundance, forget about it. You get nothing. You get, no distribution, you wouldn't get agents, you wouldn't get producers, you wouldn't get laid. I mean, it was like you were dead in the water. So, that was the stark reality, because there weren't as many festivals, there weren't as many opportunities to premiere your film. It was really Sundance or nothing. So we had heard about a couple independent filmmakers that individually the year before, in January '94, that had gone to Park City and done their own kind of renegade screenings, because they didn't get into Sundance. Of course, one of those groups of filmmakers was Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the South Park guys, but this was before South Park. Their first film, which was their thesis film from the University of Colorado, was called Cannibal the Musical. And they did their own little renegade screening in a hotel room and gotten a little bit of attention. And there's another guy named James Marandino who had a film called The Upstairs Neighbor, and he got a little attention for that. But we thought, all right, why don't we take that model and really step it up a significant notch and get a dozen feature directors and then ultimately a dozen short directors and combine all of our resources. So, some of us were good at publicity. Some people had projectionists on their team. We just kind of all stayed in one condo. And initially we were actually in Salt Lake City doing screenings. And then immediately we realized, because we thought that was, that's only an inch away from Park City on the map. People will come down there. But it turns out it's quite a bit farther than that, because the map wasn't to scale. And so we actually, Lisa Raven, the one who was teaching at Drexel, she said, "Screw this," and all of our films were on film then. It was my film was on 35 millimeter. She had a film on 16 millimeter. So we're, it's not so easy to show up with projectors. So we rented a projector in Salt Lake City, drove up the mountain to Park City, and we rented a room literally 30 feet down the hall in a hotel from Sundance's main screening venue, which was at the Prospector Hotel. And the next morning, Sundance woke up and there was Slamdance projecting films, 30 feet down the hall. And our screening room was right in front of where their kind of sold out line, their waiting list line was. So we would, 15 minutes after their screening time, we would just, show our films, and so everyone from their wait list line would just file right into our screenings. And then 2 days later, we got a call from a guy who said, "Hey man, is it too late to get into Slamdance?" And we said, "Well, yeah, kind of. We're halfway done." He said, "Oh, that's too bad. I'm up in Park City showing my short film with two 35 millimeter projectors." And we're like, "You have two 35 millimeter projectors in Park City? Congratulations, you're part of the festival." And so then we started showing our 35 films up there. But it was tough. There's another Philly connection, filmmaker. I don't know if you know Eugene Martin. He used to teach at Temple. He lives in Texas now, but he's a Philly guy. But he read about Slamdance because we had gotten an article in Variety in that December, like a month before the festival, and he had AOL, and AOL would get their entertainment news directly from Variety. So he read about it on AOL, and he was one of our first filmmakers too. So there's a little bit of a Philly connection there, but yeah, so it wasn't easy. And then after we did it the first year, like by the end of that first week, we said, you know what, I think there's probably, it's clear that we were kind of filling this niche, and we kind of became press darlings. The New York Times called us a group of cheerful subversives, after interviewing me, and that name kind of has stuck with me. And we were getting great press for it. So we said, well, let's just do it again. And one of our guys, Peter Baxter, had a credit card, so we're like, well, great, let's use that and put down a deposit on the hotel in Park City for the next year. And so then we decided to come back, and we just finished our 23rd year, I think, our 23rd festival, something like that. So, and then we kind of we stuck with the mantra which was really goes back to the first year of focusing, at least on our competition features, on first-time directors with limited budgets and no distribution in place. And we've really just kind of stuck to that over the years, and because of that, we've shown first films by some pretty amazing alumni now. People like, we showed Christopher Nolan's first film, the Russo brothers, who now do all the Marvel films. We showed their first film. Lena Dunham's first film. Ben Zeitlin, who did Beast of the Southern Wild. Ryan Johnson, who's doing the new Star Wars. He was actually PA on Omaha the Movie. He was a friend of mine from USC, and but we showed his first short at Slamdance, and you
also showed one of my personal favorites too, Dan, which was Napoleon Dynamite by Jared Hess. Yeah,
well, we didn't show Napoleon Dynamite. We showed the short film that Jared shot, which Napoleon Dynamite was based on. And at that screening, I remember it was just showing before a feature, and I don't even remember what the feature was, but a couple of producers come up to me after the screening. They're like, "Hey, Dan, can you introduce us to that short guy, Jared?" I go, yeah. And they go, "Hey, man, we really love that short. Do you have a feature version of it?" And he says, "Why, yes, I do." And because he was prepared, he said, "It's called Napoleon Dynamite." And 6 months later, he calls me up. He said, "Dan, we're making that movie." Like, awesome. And then Napoleon, they premiered it at Sundance and sold for $4 million. It gets distributed by Fox Searchlight, grosses $80 million, and they get screwed. And the producer of the film, Jeremy Kuhn, who's another Utah guy, was so screwed by Fox Searchlight on that project that to find out just how screwed he got financially, he went out and got an MBA, and which is one of the strangest reasons to get an MBA. But anyway, but those guys have been great Slamdance alumni over the years too. So.
Yeah, and see that's a great resource. And when Jared Hess, of all the interviews I've ever seen with him, was he really that excited? Because he always seems like such a low key. Like, he doesn't curse. He always seems like such a mellow guy.
Right. Yeah. No, he was pretty mellow, but he did call me like right before they started shooting, and he's like, "Dan, I need a casting director. Do you have a casting director? Like, any other tips?" And he was freaking out a little bit, but he did great. Yeah, and he is a pretty mellow guy. That's true. Yeah. So, and it was, and part of it was, I think part of the reason we showed it is we had always kind of had a bit of a early commitment in Parks, to show films by Utah filmmakers in a way that Sundance did not always have. And that was, we were like, "Hey, here's this BYU short, that's cool. Let's show local, Utah film." Because Sundance tried to kick us out of Park City for like our first 20 years, so anything we could do to ingratiate ourselves to the locals. They literally had the sheriff of Park City try to run us out of town on a rail. But over the years, we tried to do a lot of kind of local politicking, and we're now friends with the people on the city council and the mayor and the new sheriff. And part of that was making it easier for local Utah people to buy tickets, just something as simple as that, but also like to, we hire a lot of locals there for the festival, and our projections now are mostly local Salt Lake and Park City guys, and filmmakers. So that was sort of an early case of that, and it worked out great for everyone.
So Dan, when you say they tried to run you out of town, like specifically, I can imagine what they could have done. So I imagine like they tried to buy hotel rooms way in advance, and there's none left.
Yep.
And with the sheriff, exactly, I imagine that's exactly what they did.
Yeah. Now this one hotel called the Yarrow Hotel, which I think has now been just renamed the DoubleTree or something, but it's where we showed those first 35 millimeter movies in Park City that first year, and then we had booked that space for the second year, and then so we were there our second year in '96, and then they just outbid us, for that place and any other place that we even thought about going. Luckily, there was one smaller kind of locally run hotel that wasn't run by a chain or a conglomerate or anything like that, called the Treasure Mountain Inn in Park City. And it was kind of run by this really nice kind of sort of local hippie couple. And Sundance had, I think, pissed them off earlier. Like they had tried to get Sundance to do things there, and Sundance always kind of poo-pooed them. So when we came knocking on their door, they were like, "We like you guys. That's our spirit." So that has been our home for, 20 out of the 23 years, pretty much, for most of the time. And over the years, that very nice couple, they've kind of matured, and he's on the city council now. So, and ran for mayor last time. So so they're now like, kind of an establishment, hotel in Park City. And so they've been great to us. So we do, and it's right in the heart of Main Street in Park City, and it's across the street from one of Sundance's big venues, the Egyptian Theater. So we're literally a snowball's throw across from Sundance now, and it works out great. I mean, I think for most people who come out to Park City, I mean, Slamdance has kind of become almost the de facto section of Sundance. You go to Sundance screenings, you go to Slamdance screenings, you go to Sundance parties, you go to Slamdance parties. It's kind of just one other little ring in the circus now. And we kind of, a little bit of what we did was modeling ourselves after, in Cannes, in 1968, a group of directors there were kind of frustrated, and they started something called Directors Fortnight, and that's been going on for 50 years. So, so we didn't invent this wheel. We just jumped on and kept running on it. And that kind of Directors Fortnight has kind of coexists with the main competition section at Cannes, but they're separate, separately run, and that's kind of the same thing with Slamdance. And Slamdance does other things too. We do year-round screening series in LA and Chicago now, and other cities at various times. And we also have the screenplay competition. That's a year-round thing that's very successful in its own right. So, but we've kind of kept the core festival is really very small and intimate, and we do things like hot tub summits where we have panel discussions in hot tubs and things like that give the vibe of it is very different. But one thing we've noticed is that a lot of our filmmakers will have their first film play at Slamdance, but then their second film will play at Sundance, and they wind up doing particularly well at Sundance, I think, because they've kind of been trained. They know what condos to stay at. They know to get their flu shot. They know what publicists to hire. It's a little bit of a training ground for them. And even this year, two of the big winners at Sundance, Macon Blair directed a film. Well, he starred in a film that was at Sundance and produced or at Slamdance a few years ago. So he's one of our alumni. And then even in their foreign narrative program, a guy named Christopher Lee from London, or from England, Francis Lee. He was a Slamdance guy. He had a film at Slamdance 4 years ago. And so for a guy from England, he's been to Park City before, so he was able to hit the ground running, in Sundance, and really did very well out there. But also people like Lynn Shelton, Drake DeRamus, Ben Zeitlin's a great example, of people that their first film, whether it's a feature or short, will show at Sundance and then move on to Sundance. And I think it's taken a while, but I think Sundance is starting to figure that out. That, oh, wait a minute, these Slamdance crazies, they're actually, they're a pretty good farm team for us, and that's fine. We're happy to serve that role.
So when you first, founded Slamdance, Dan, did you ever imagine, that it would grow to what it is today?
Not really. And honestly, the nice thing about it is that it, physically speaking, it hasn't really grown. It was funny. Chris Nolan came back a couple of years ago for our 20th anniversary or something, and he said, "You know what? The room looks exactly the same. The screening room, it has 100. It only fits 120 people. It's too hot. It's too cold. It's it's a janky, kind of hotel room that doesn't really. It's not a perfect screening room." But that's the vibe of Slamdance, and that's what we've always tried to kind of do over the years. Because as the economy has kind of ebbed and flowed, like in the late '90s, early 2000s, there was all this crazy .com money rushing into indie film, and people wanted to buy us out and turn us into bigger things. And there were a couple of years where we would throw massive parties, like thousands of people. The Roots were our closing night band one year. Moby was our closing DJ for 2 years in a row. I mean, we had some really insane parties and things, but we always kept the screenings and the number of films very manageable and very focused on a certain kind of film, and again, this mantra of first-time directors with low budgets, but all kinds of different genres, documentaries, narratives, whatever. And so, because of that, I think we've been able to weather just the economics of change over the years, the ups and downs of the economy, but also, we've kept our focus just pretty much razor focused on these first-time directors, and because of that, we've never really sold out to anyone. Believe me, we've tried. No one's buying, and our sponsorship is pretty minimal. But the way we do our programming is all done by alumni filmmakers, which is very different than most other festivals. Most festivals have this very top-down hierarchy, and Slamdance is a bottom-up thing. With blind submissions, we don't play favorites with anyone, and because of that, there's a sort of naive purity to Slamdance that most other festivals don't really have. Sundance it's a great festival, and there's believe me, it's a lot of terrific films there. But because they have like these Sundance labs, they're obligated to show so many of those films, and they other people that the fix is kind of in for, distributors, and so consequently and some of those films are good and some of them aren't good, and so they're not left with that many slots of the random guy in Omaha to get in. Whereas at Slamdance, it doesn't matter how connected you are. Even when I submit my films, because we should just show a few films out of competition that don't have to be first-time directors. So so we can still show some of our own films still. But even then, I still have to submit an entry fee. I still have to send my film to the committees, and they're voted on by my colleagues, and sometimes I don't get it, So, but that's part of what has kind of made us, like I said, just naively pure in one sense or another. And I think people like that, and they respond to the intimacy that we have at these screenings and kind of the fun of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, they're like, Dan, sorry, you couldn't get in your own film festival. Sorry about that, buddy.
Oh, yeah. No, I know. Believe me, I get very upset when that happens, but, it does happen from time to time. So, but yeah, so that's Slamdance. And then I've kind of taken all these experiences and I've kept making films over the years. And Slamdance's motto is by filmmakers for filmmakers, or as I like to say, by unemployed filmmakers for unemployed filmmakers. And so, I've kept making films and all the other folks have as well. And then finally I decided to put all these stories down into a book this year. So, called The Cheerful Subversive Guide to Independent Filmmaking, and which was published by Focal Press and Rutledge, so that's the other thing that I've got going on right now is that this book just came out and has all these goofy stories in it. So so if people are interested in that, they should by all means go buy the book on Amazon or wherever else fine indie film books are sold.
I'm actually going to link to that in the show notes, Dan, and I'll fully admit.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, and I'll fully admit to this. Of all the film books that I have not purchased your book yet. So it's on it's on my to buy list. I promise. But I just have I have not bought your book yet, Dan. I'm sorry to admit that.
Oh my gosh. Well, there's now's the time. So
this interview is over.
Yeah, that's it. Till you buy the book. All these stories are in there, and the book is really I tried to make it on the one hand, it's a very practical guide from beginning to end of how to make an independent film. I mean, it literally starts from either writing a script or buying a script or acquiring a play or a novel or things like that, if you're not a genius and you can't write a script, to financing, but not just like, it's not a how-to on how to do Kickstarter. I mean, I certainly talk about that in there, but it's also like the nuts and bolts of like, how do you register an LLC with the Securities and Exchange Commission? And then how do you write a chapter about that is funny? So, which is not an easy challenge, but I think I pulled it off. So the real nuts and bolts of how to make an independent film, and then to casting. How do you cast an A-list cast in a micro-budget film? I mean, I've gotten some amazing actors in my films, Oscar winners, Oscar nominees, Golden Globe winners, and I've yet to make a film for more than a few $100,000, but I've somehow been able to do it, and so I have the tricks to that in there. To then, okay, what do you do on set? Like, should you wear name tag, hello, my name is name tags on the first day of production? And yes, you should. And strangely enough, nobody ever does, but that's in the book, And then I go into the, post-production, then the festival circuit, like, because that's a nice thing, is having started Slamdance, that's kind of gotten me, I go to a lot of film festivals, not only with my own films, but I get invited to, part of the reason to make a film is to get on the festival circuit. Why do you go on the festival circuit? So then the next year you get invited back to be on the jury circuit, and that's when they treat you really nicely. So I've been on a lot of festival juries in Trinidad and the Bahamas and all kinds of fun places like that. And but the one question filmmakers always ask me is, well, how do you go to all these film festivals and not go broke applying for festivals? Because they all charge fees. So I have tricks in there on how to get your fees waived. And then I get into distribution and doing self-distribution, because over the years I've done self-distribution. I've been with distributors, against distributors, and I've kind of seen it all. And then into like doing Oscar campaigns, dealing with piracy, one way or the other. And so it's a real kind of nuts and bolts book, but at the same time, like, I know, look, nobody's really seen my films, honestly, very much, but I have little sidebar sections on, much more famous directors like Robert Altman and the Nolan brothers and Christopher Nolan and the Russo brothers and Rian Johnson and all these other people that are much more famous than me. So there's little sidebar sections on them. There's poems in there, because I recite a poem every year at Slamdance, and so like 15 of those poems are in the book, which are kind of goofy. They rhyme a lot, that's all I can say, really. And fun things like that. So it's so I think it's a good book, certainly for filmmakers, but I think also if you're a film fan and you're interested in this kind of, as I like to call it, the Slamdance generation of filmmakers, it's as close to an oral history of Slamdance as you're going to find anywhere, really. So anyway, so whatever, that's the book. And if you're not sure about it, there's on YouTube, there's a trailer for the book, because you can't be a filmmaker and write a film book and not make your own trailer for your own book. So that's up there. And and then meanwhile, I'm just in post-production on my new film too. So that's the other exciting thing going on with me.
What's your new film about?
So, well, it's called Bernard and Huey, and it's based on a screenplay written by Jules Feiffer. And you may remember Jules was, you may not remember, he was a cartoonist for The Village Voice for 44 years with a cartoon called Feiffer. And won a Pulitzer Prize for that. He won an Oscar for an animated short he did. He, as a screenwriter, he wrote Carnal Knowledge, the great Mike Nichols film with Jack Nicholson. He wrote Popeye, the Robert Altman film. And he won a couple Obies for some plays he wrote. And I found a script that he wrote 30 years ago called Bernard and Huey that had never gotten made. It was originally Showtime was going to make it, and then they changed ownership. The Wiki turned in the script, and so it never got made and just sat on the shelf. And it took me 3 years to track it down. And Jules is still alive and kicking and writing graphic novels. He's 88, lives out in the Hamptons, and he's like, "All right, Mirvish, let's make this thing. I'm 88," So so we just shot it, and it's great. It's really turning out pretty amazing, if I may say so. And no one else can say so because no one else has seen it yet. But we got a great cast. I finally figured out how to get an Oscar winner into your cast, by the way, and that's to cast an Oscar-winning screenwriter. So again, going back to the Alexander Payne connection, Jim Rash, who co-wrote The Descendants, which they won an Oscar for, but he's also a terrific actor. He was in he was Dean Pelton in Community, and so the Russo brothers had worked with him. And Jim also directed and acted in The Way Back, the Steve Carell movie. And anyway, so he's one of the leads. He plays Bernard, and Huey is played by the great David Koechner, from the Anchorman movies, and a lot of other really great actors are in this thing. Bellamy Young from Scandal, Nancy Travis from How I Married an Axe Murderer. Strangely enough, axe murderers come back into the story. Sasha Alexander from Rizzoli and Isles, Mae Whitman from Parenthood and The Duff and Independence Day is in it. Richard Kind is in the movie. I just added a little bit more to his team yesterday. So anyway, it's a really fun cast, and it's about these two guys who are 50-year-old guys who are old friends who haven't seen each other in 25 years, and they kind of reconnect, and one starts dating the other guy's daughter, and complications ensue. So, but we just shot it this fall, and just finishing up the editing right now. So hopefully it'll hit the festival circuit in the summer or fall, and yeah, there you go. So that's the new movie.
So obviously, Dan, you're going to submit to Slamdance, right?
Well, that's the interesting thing. Is I probably will, but only after it's played at some other festivals. I think one thing I have found is that if I premiere my film at my own festival, then nobody in the industry takes it that seriously. So, but it works out well if I premiere the film at some other places and then, maybe screen it at Slamdance. So, it's strangely enough, it is not the most obvious place to show my film. But if it works out, a lot of it is also timing, like when do you finish a film and where is it on the festival circuit, and how does that work out? So, but it is always nice to show my stuff in Park City because we have it really is like a second family to me. It's a large dysfunctional, second family. But yeah, so we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, so that's the new film and the new book, The Cheerful Subversive Guide to Independent Filmmaking. Definitely go out and buy that. And yeah, what else can I tell you, man?
Well, Dan, I think we're kind of that's what I want to talk about was the book too, and I'm glad we got to mention that. And we've been talking for about an hour and 5 minutes now, and I just want to ask Dan, in closing, is there anything that we didn't discuss that maybe you wanted to say, or anything you want to say to sort of put a period at the end of this whole conversation?
Well, yeah, it's a longer story, so I can't tell it, but it is in the book, which is how to, if you can't win an Oscar, I do tell you the story about what I did do, which is you can get the Oscars to change their rules because of you, and that has to do with a real estate musical I made called Open House. Like, especially now people are talking about La La Land and it's a musical. What people forget is the Academy actually has a category called Best Original Musical, and strangely enough, they keep not activating the category. And so I have a kind of fun story about how in 2004, along with Trey Parker and Matt Stone and Neil Young, it's an odd collection of people, we almost got them to activate this category. And I went so far as to shoot another film in Germany just to get the film and just to get the first film nominated. Anyway, it's a goofy story, but it's in the book. But it takes too long to tell right now. So, but otherwise, yeah, no, everyone just go. If you want to make a film, you should go make it. If you don't want to make a film, don't, because it's a pain in the ass. But there you go. That's my advice.
And for everyone listening, I'm going to put everything Dan and I talked about in the show notes. As always, at DaveBullis.com. I'm going to link to Dan's book, the trailer, everything we talked about.
Thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Dan. Dan, where can people find you out online?
DanMirvish.com is the easiest way to sort of track me down. I'm on Facebook at Dan Mirvish. I have too many friends. They won't let me get any more friends, but people can follow me there. And then on Twitter, it's at Dan Mirvish.
Okay, and I'll link to those.
Mirvish. So, yeah.
And I'm going to link to all that in the show notes as well, everybody. So whenever you can bother Dan it's all social media sites like I do. It's all and everything's at davebullis.com. Twitter, it's at Dave_Bullis. You know what? I'm going to throw my YouTube out there too, as Real Iron Fist Films, where I'm going to start adding more stuff slowly but surely as I try to find time in the day to make more stuff. But
right.
But Dan, I want to say thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Dave. And have fun out there, everyone.
And I wish you the best of well, Dan. And if you ever want to come back on, please let me know. I'd love to have you back on. We could talk more about maybe you'll have more axe murder stories too. And I
hope so. Yeah.
All right, Dan. I want you to have a great day, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.